One of the most important milestones since the disclosure process began in earnest back in 1991 was the publishing of The Day After Roswell by Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso in 1997. The allegations in this book rocked the foundations of a long-standing and deeply entrenched cover-up. To this day, neither the Army, Department of Defense, nor any other agency of government has formally responded to these allegations. In the book, The Day After Roswell, the colonel disclosed how he spearheaded the Army's super-secret reverse engineering project that seeded extraterrestrial technology into American corporations such as IBM, Hughes Aircraft, Bell Labs, and Dow Corning, without their knowledge. He describes the devices found aboard the Roswell craft and how they became the precursors for today's integrated circuit chips, fiber optics, lasers, night vision equipment, super tenacity fibers, and classified discoveries such as psychotropic devices that can translate human thoughts into signals that control machinery, stealth aircraft technology, and Star Wars particle beam devices. He also discusses the role that extraterrestrial technology played in shaping geopolitical policy and events, how it helped the United States surpass the Russians in space, started elaborate Army initiatives such as the Star Wars projects, Project Horizon, which was to place a military base on the moon, and HARP, and ultimately brought about the end of the Cold War. Colonel Corso also said that captured UFOs were or are kept at Norton, Edwards, and Nellis Air Force Base, and he said a working UFO group was set up by President Truman in September of 1947, a group some call MJ-12, and that has functioned ever since. Corso Sr. continued to disclose that in the 1950s, 2 crude prototypes of anti-gravity craft were constructed, but were powered by crude human nuclear fission generators, which were inefficient and leaked radiation. He says in his book that the Star Wars program was always primarily to prepare for war against ETs in case of invasion. The military and political groups Corso Sr. allied with adopted the same outlook on the ET visitors, fearing them as some invasion force that had to be eliminated by a crash program of back-engineering Star Wars weapons from captured UFO technology. And to his credit, he did not personally fall into that reactionary conservatism that viewed ETs as insidious potential invaders. During this next hour, his son, Philip Corso Jr., joins me on the air live, and at the end of the hour, we'll be presenting information never before revealed to the public right here on the show. Welcome, Phil.
Yeah, hi, Hillary.
So let's start with time. What topics would you like to cover about that? Because I have several specific questions. And my first being, what do the topics of ETs and UFOs and time change technology have in common?
Well, I think they are one and the same, in my opinion. They all share a similar technology. As you were doing the introductory, there were many things there that we can elaborate on. This could go on for many hours, so I know we have to condense it into one. So I think the best thing is probably you just ask me the questions, and I'll see how I can answer them. I have a few things that I would like to bring in, and then, of course, at the end, the letter that we just received. The letter is going to be very important, I think, if it is real. Now, I say if it is real, because it still hasn't been verified. It does have some military codes on it, and the man that brought it forward wants to remain anonymous. And it is very interesting, so we'll bring that, like you said, at the end. But go ahead and shoot. Ask me.
Well, I think what my listeners would probably want to know, going back to your introduction, before we get into the topic of time issues, your father revealed, for some people who may not be, versed in what that book was about, and they hear me say that all of this information and technology was reverse engineered. Let's start there. Let's give them some background on exactly what that was all about.
Yeah, well, the book got started actually by accident. In 1992, my father and I ran a small electronics company, and Dad would sit at the desk and say, like he said in his own words, hold down the fort while I went out and worked on yachts. Well, he got bored sitting there, so I said, why don't you write your memoirs, which he did. And we got turned down his memoirs I guess a dozen times or more. Nobody wanted a colonel from World War II and what he did in the war. But there was one paragraph in there that was about, I guess just a short brief. It said, when I was in R&D in 1960 with General Trudeau, I seeded alien artifacts. Well, ufologists, which we probably all know very well, George Knapp out in Arizona, picked up on it, called Dad, and Bill Burns got involved and some others, and they said, why don't you elaborate on it? So hence the book was born. Never really meant to be. Later on, Dad was, said that he wrote the book and he declassified the parts of the book himself because he was the classifying officer. And he said he did it mainly for the youth. He says the youth can handle the truth and they're entitled to the truth. Unfortunately, the book caused the family a lot of problems. We got sued by people we didn't even know. And on my dad's deathbed, he was really quite sorry that he had wrote the book, only for the reason that he said he had left a family in a mess. And he wanted to stay. He wanted to help clean the mess up. I said, Pop, don't worry. I'll take care of it. So I'm hoping that people out there will realize this book did not come forth easily. Our family has paid a dear price to bring it forward.
Well, I think that's a good point to make because, the first thing somebody might ask is, well, if this was such a secret and this is such devastating information to release to the public, how would it get published in the first place? It wasn't an easy process for him, was it?
Yeah, well, the publishing also was done very quickly. Bill Burns happened to be in the family of Simon & Schuster through his wife, Nancy, and it got published by a young publisher named Tish Corbin, and he was able to do it so quickly that my dad was not able to have a legal reading on it. He never did a proofreading. In fact, we have another book where he might say some of the book got a little bit of Hollywood in it, and he didn't like that. And so anyway, that's how the book got written so quickly. And if you remember, right after the book was revealed in 97, the Air Force came out with their so-called, quote, final word on UFOs when they brought up the crash dummies and stuff. I myself think that was a rebuttal to the book. And also we had Senator Thurman, which wrote the foreword for it, and there was quite a upset over that. Senator Thurman, just to take you to the end of it and make a long story short, fired his whole staff over them trying to say that they were going to sue Dad for falsely putting that in the book. The first 1,000 issues of the book have the General Trudeau's foreword in it. And Tish Corbin, the editor, said that someday they may be collector's items. So if anybody out there can find one in an old bookstore, buy it.
Well, I mean, going back to the reverse engineering projects that were released into the military-industrial complex, is this still happening today? Are we still seeing the products of that reverse engineering pop up in our culture?
Well, yes, we've had many scientists to the house after Dad wrote the book, and these guys said we knew something was up. They said because it came too fast, too quick. Now, don't think that there were not lasers prior to Dad introducing the little flashlight, which will be mentioned later in this letter. He called it a flashlight, but it was, of course, a laser. And what took place there was already night vision came from the Germans, which, by the way, Dad said they had a craft too. And so when Dad seeded this information along with General Trudeau and the funds and the artifact, only when they would begin to flounder did Dad put the artifact in. And they put it into companies that were already working on in those areas. They told them, take the patents for it, run with it with the civilian, do whatever you want in the civilian culture with it, but the military gets first priority on it. They left no paper trail, which later on this letter, if it is true or genuine, is probably the first piece of paperwork I have ever seen, and it was probably a mistake on Dad's part. And thank goodness for it, if it is real again.
Yeah, I have to also ask you about certain things that we hear about here and there, such as weather modification technology, the HARP program. Are these in fact built on this reverse engineered alien technology, or this? I have a hard time believing that this is us coming up with these things on ourselves. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that you have to remember that when the integrated circuit is introduced, it changes our world. It changed our world in such a way that General Trudeau, some of the German scientists that Dad brought over in charge of Operation Paperclip for Eisenhower and such, they all said that it's 200 years advancement. And that's something I'd like to touch on also, is that technologically we are 200 years advanced from what we should be, if these gentlemen are right. But morally, the religious issue, the economic issues and such, we are still far behind, and we haven't caught our technology. And Dad and all of these powers to be and these very brilliant men were very worried that these technical items would be misused. And indeed they were. For instance, the stock market would not have been able to do what it did today without the computer. So actually the computer was misused, but we do know that all great inventions have is a two-sided sword. As far as technology of today, yes, it all came from basically 5 different items. Some of the technology Dad left notes on that I still have, and we plan to release these in the Corso files in the near future. And for instance, I'll just give you one that is really something. The other part of the IC that was burned, after they did more research with it, Bell Laboratories this is, they discovered that there was a fluid amplification, which of course is an oxymoron because we all know from hydraulics you cannot amplify fluid. Whatever you put in comes out at the other end. But on the atomic base, it can be done, and it was done on a molecular base with the other part of this integrated circuit. Just to prove that, Dad took a brief to John Glenn when he was senator and said, here's a car that runs on 4 flashlight batteries, and this is no little scooter. This was a regular car. 4 flashlight batteries for 1 year. Constant running, by the way. So that technology no one knows about. I have never mentioned it before, but just the fact that we know it existed, it can be back engineered again.
Now, I was going to get to this later in the show, but the fact that free energy technology really is already available to us and we aren't using it, do you feel that perhaps that technology is being put into use for weaponization?
Well, like I said, we have many issues we have to catch up on before you're going to have free technology. Dr. Stephen Greer goes around and he looks for a lot of this free energy. You might as well forget it, because it's not going to happen, again, because our economic base has not caught up and is not ready for free energy. We first have to change our way of thinking, which is being done only because we fear the greenhouse effects and such like that. But we have to begin changing, not based upon fear, but based upon a common goal to increase our morals and to not let the economic system dictate to us what we need to be doing in the near future, especially in politics.
Yeah. Well, it brings up my first question when we started the show was the use of time change and time travel. And so is it like we're kind of going along 2 timelines where we have this technology and yet biologically we have not caught up with that technology? So what do you see as a way of furthering our advancement to catch up with the technology?
Well, that might be very true. My dad was ghostwriter for Jean Dixon, which is a very clairvoyant woman that passed away some 10 years ago. He was ghostwriter for her for 30 years. My father had a very keen insight into the future. And yes, he said that she could at will change the timeline. Now, does that timeline mean that it changed? And this is the same timeline that many of the religions speak of in the Hopi Indians. Do we have the power within our mind to do things? Well, you and I, Hillary, both know that, yes, it can be done. And, for instance, Steven Seagal called Dad and said, flew him out to Vegas. And he only wanted to know one thing. He said, I had a near accident just like you, and time slowed down, the car bent, and I want to know what happened. So he and Dad became friends. They told of that. It's happened to me. It's happened to my sons. And it's probably happened to many people out there. When you see that car coming at you and it's going to smash into you, it seems like time does change. And of course, we both know that time is relative, and it's relative to the human mind. You make a trip somewhere, it takes a long time going, and you're back in a second if you're busy in the car talking and having a good time, and you're very happy. So we know time is relative. So the answer to that question, I believe yes.
And why is it such a taboo topic? So, I mean, what are your thoughts on it? You don't find a lot of information on, the Internet on this subject. People have some theories here and there. But why is it so very remotely spoken of?
Yeah, well, it's my best subject, too. I love speaking of time. I see time myself as being more digital. And what I mean by that is the human brain, I have a very good friend that is a neurosurgeon, and he and I talk quite a bit. And we believe that the human brain sees in icons. For instance, your birthday, when your child was born. And these are the memories that you store away, and they're actually pictures. And these pictures, when you recall them, if you could visualize more than time moving forward and back. In other words, we have our timeline when we're born and when we pass away. So we see everything within that timeline. But actually, I don't believe it's correct. I think it's more digitally with these icons sideways. In other words, Jesus is still dying on the cross right now. It's just our limited human brain that puts these limitations on it. The limitations are put on by us, by our society, too. As we begin educating, they say, well, here's a clock. Now, I talked to Edgar Mitchell recently, and he says, yes, time is based upon the movement of the planets, and it always has been. He says we need some other standard to go by, and I'm not talking about atomic clocks or anything like that. I mean a new mental standard to go by. And when you begin thinking this way, it opens up all new dimensions for you. Then you begin thinking the way that the scientists should think, and they think in M theory and string theory and such like that. So these are questions that people are bringing forward now and beginning to understand. And more people, almost everyone you talk to, understands these things nowadays. I myself, the popular belief for me is that it's us taking care of ourselves. And my dad said, there's something awful about the human race. And he never really elaborated on it, but I have a feeling what it is. I think maybe the missing link is us. In other words, I think our future selves come back and create us, create man. And if you just think about that a second, it does make a lot of sense, because maybe that's what all of these abductions are about. Maybe there are implants being put in, and these implants are probably changing the race. Now, one of the notes we're going to release in the Corso files is, my dad wrote a very disturbing notes, and these notes were what he called genetic bombs. And just to prove that he was right on with this was before the diseases of scars and AIDS, and he has them in there, and he actually calls them by their proper names years before they were out. So these genetic bombs will not necessarily for warfare, but they will change the human race almost overnight into something else. And I do believe that there are certain people walking around that are indeed hybrids or changes, not necessarily from space aliens, but maybe from our future selves. Just a theory. It's just a theory. I have no facts to back it up.
That's really amazing, because if what you're saying is true, then these diseases and perhaps even the vaccines themselves to cure these diseases hold what would be considered, the biggest atrocity to humanity, is that we're actually playing God and taking this kind of material and injecting it into people without them understanding what they're being exposed to. Is that what you're saying, basically, that's what's happening?
Yeah, for instance, I build with my three sons, I build the experimental aircraft. I would come home. My dad lived with us the last 5 years of his life after my mom passed away, and I would come home full of fiberglass, sit on the floor, and say, what are you writing about today? Well, one day, just like a kid would ask his dad, he says, well, who is God anyway? And my dad looked at me, and the answer still today, I wonder about it, because he said, well, God is the intellect. So if God is the intellect, and that is us, so I know I'm going to get in trouble with a lot of religions here, but possibly that's all we get is ourselves. possibly. I mean, it's just a theory, so don't anyone out there, say Phil Corso is an atheist and he doesn't believe in God. I do believe in an organization within the universe, and I do believe that we all bow to that organization.
Well, I find it interesting that you bring this up because the spiritual advancement, the spiritual, enlightenment of the human population on this planet really is what we're trying to catch up anyway, isn't it? When it comes to technology?
Yes, absolutely. And just for the fact, I do believe in Jesus, and I do believe that he was a man from God that accepted the responsibility. And I do believe that, that the religion, the Bible is still being written, and I do believe that religion needs to upgrade itself. And by upgrading itself, I mean the Bible is still being written. And if it doesn't do that, my prediction is the younger people are not going to take it anymore. They're going to find their own way, which may not be the right way. So, the religious leaders need to address it. And, of course, we know in the recent past it's been done. The Pope says he would like to baptize E.T. There's now a ambassador for the UN. And we also know that, there's a possibility that very soon we may have to deal with such an entity. Now, when I say entity, I'm not lumping it in one basket. I'm saying there is dimensional travel, which my father has actually talked to one of them. He's had other encounters with one, and I used to be very against him speaking about that, but I do see that people are changing, especially in the last 12 years since Dad has passed away, and you can talk about it more readily now.
It just blows my mind that I'm still back on that statement where you talked about these DNA bombs, so to speak. What are people's recourse in dealing with this information? I mean, and I have to ask you, Phil, how are you still alive when you're exposing and disclosing this kind of information? I mean, I've seen people taken out all across the board on all kinds of different topics, and here you are still standing strong, able to tell the public about what's going on. How is that?
Well, there's a hands-off policy with her family. I know that. I've been told that. I've been told that by some very important people on this planet in high positions. And what we are, I guess, is an enigma. And that's fine. Leave it that way, because I also have been told what to say and when to say and how to say. And there are certain areas that we do not talk about. My dad was Senate internal investigator for Senator Javits, which investigated the Warren Commission. My dad was in charge of that. It's still classified. I will not talk about it. I don't know anything about it. And I won't talk about anything that is classified unless I've been told otherwise. We've had every agency, every sort of person come to our hangar, talk to us, spy on us, threaten us, give us gifts. And we've been all through that. And I think that maybe we have reached a understanding, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. And so, in being that, what do you feel that perhaps this, because what it feels to me, I have to be totally honest with you, is it feels like it's kind of a slow leak process of disclosure to people.
It's a slow education, Hillary, right.
Yeah, but I mean, even in the great spiritual teachings, we have a teacher who takes a disciple through these spiritual teachings where they don't learn all at once that everything around them is false. The paradigm doesn't collapse all at once. And so I've always wondered, I've always had this question, if it's a slow leak for educational purposes or, on purpose because they don't want people's minds to be blown instantly and have everything collapse on them.
Well, of course. Yeah, I agree with you. It's a slow education. And you see, it's not up to us. In other words, E.T. or time traveler or whatever, it's not that we are waiting for them to reveal themselves. They're waiting for us to grow up. And there's no doubt about that. Are we growing up? Well, I believe in the agnostic spark, that everybody has the achievement of God within them if they can only look for it and want to achieve it.
Well, I think I agree with that. I think it is a growing up process. It's like a 2-year-old trying to understand the wisdom of a 100-year-old. It just doesn't seem to work.
That's right.
So I want to go backwards a little bit here where we were just talking about the microchipping agenda. Is that part of, in your opinion, a way to biologically advance people to catch them up to technology? Do you have any comments on that, or is it?
Oh yeah. Dad, and all the powers to be, the scientists and all, they said one of the things they were also worried about by releasing the microchip was that they believe it's a living entity. Now, we'll get a lot of backlash on that, but look how fast it has developed. In fact, here's what Dad said. Every year in research and development in the military, there's more advancements each year than there was the previous year before and all the rest of the years in history. So it's exponentially going up at a rate that we can't even imagine. So here we have an integrated circuit that was a little 6-transistor radio 50 years ago, and now look what it is. It's an iPhone that does almost everything that needs to be done, but put a holographic image out, which will be around the corner. In fact, when something comes out, we all know it's outdated by the time it arrives on the shelves.
But nobody else does. The masses don't. They're kind of all ignorant, and they think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it's a wonderful thing. And so is technology, in a way, advancing people spiritually, do you believe?
Well, yes, I do believe that. I think that technology will grow into something that will help us all if, again, we put it in the right direction. Are we putting it in the right direction right now? No, not really, because the economic system is dictating where it goes. The great military complex is dictating where it goes, and I think we need to rethink some of that. I would like to see all political parties in the future be scientists. I don't think we need lawyers anymore. I know we're going to get some backlash from that, too. But a lawyer, to me, in politics is no more than a person that couldn't make it in his own profession, so he sees this other horse and jumps on it. It's a shame. And there are some good ones out there, I'm sure. In any type of society, there's good and bad. So, I'm not criticizing all lawyers. Mr. Kent, which is my lawyer, is a very decent, honest man. So, but we have to rethink our politics. I would like to see the science party as a third party. We look at the Republican and Democrat, and there's not much choice there. And I think everyone would admit that. But if we had scientists in there, I think that they would begin to move our planet and move our technology in a different direction, which needs to be done, based upon global warming and other problems.
You often speak of benevolent intent, having a good intention and a higher spiritual connection as being part of a psychic protection and a way to move through using these technologies in a way that's a positive end. And I kind of want to combine that topic with the Philadelphia Project and how that worked in all of this that we've been talking about.
Yeah. Okay, well, the Philadelphia experiment was real. I held the brief in my hand before it was actually someone came in the house and took it from us. And Dad revealed that Einstein worked on it. And Dad was in charge of Operation Paperclip for Ike, brought the scientist here. He was not. Now, Mr. Freeman criticized my dad because he said he was MJ-12. No, he wasn't MJ-12. He was the one they reported to, and he reported to Eisenhower. So my dad was very much in the know during these times. What were we talking about? I've lost my train of thought.
The Philadelphia Project and how, higher intentions and all that. Okay,
well, Einstein was part of it, and here's what it was for. It was not invisibility. That's completely wrong. What it was, the Aldrich was equipped with 6 revolving fields with a frequency of the Earth. How do I know that? I met the man, Mr. Beckworth, over in Tampa. He's deceased last year. That actually built the transformers and worked on the Aldrich. Now, he was very good friends with Dad, too. Now, here's what it did. Germans invented a magnetic mine. During the Battle of the Atlantic, it was coming up. A magnetic mine allows the first 2 or 3 ships to pass over it. Then it pops up in the middle of the convoy and really raises havoc with several ships. So we were losing the Battle of the Atlantic. So they did this Philadelphia experiment. They were actually very successful moving the mines 500 yards through time and space. There was an accident, Dad said, The brief that I read said there was an accident. The soldiers really did, or the sailors really did, have all of the problems that's pretty much revealed in the Hollywood movie. We have had time travel for a long time. That is time travel, by the way. And we have had it for a long time. We didn't have the sophistication to pinpoint it, where now we do. I've sat at a table with Pentagon military officials, with religious officials, and at this table with Mr. Beckworth, that actually makes all the transformers, mostly for the military. He makes them for the HARP program and such like that. By the way, try to build a transformer and see what happens. You can't do it because that's Tesla technology. I've sat at the table with these people, and Mr. Beckworth wanted to release. He got up and everybody went in another room, and he started up a small armature, like a motor spinning, and it disappeared. It just went away. And he wanted to release this technology to the universities. We went back in the room. Everyone said no. So then the religious leaders said, why are you doing this? Because they're coming back with excessive baggage, the military is. So they wanted to know from me what's going on. And I said, well, it's very simple. My dad and I talked about it quite a bit. You don't just start up a time machine and move through time without having a benevolent reason. If you don't have a benevolent reason, the universe does not correct itself. For instance, you go back in time, and the old, paradox where you kill your parents and you don't exist anymore. Well, that doesn't happen in a benevolent universe. What happens is you go back in time, and you cannot return to this future. You grow forward in another future. Now you say, how does that help our future? If you go forward in the other future with the proper benevolent reasons, well, there's a ripple effect, and the ripple effect goes through the 11 membranes of the M theory and such. I don't want to get too deep into this right now, just because it's very hard to follow. I would rather just stay on, like we've been doing Pacific terms, if it's all right with you, Hillary.
Sure, yeah, that's fine. And maybe I can ask you this, and I don't know how much you want to get into this, but there seems to be two worlds converging. You have the UFO alien activity and planetary hierarchy, masters, angels, guides, religious beliefs. Do you see them as converging, or do you see them as one already?
Yeah, well, let me say this. We see this. First of all, there's a level of government that we all learn in school. The judiciary, the Congress, and so on. The president, and you have this college level or entry level. The next one after that is the secret societies. They all think that they run things, that they have power over this other lower one. They're going to impose their will with their wealth and such like that. Then you have another third level there. You have the great military complex, which President Eisenhower warned about. Dad used to carry the orders over from Ike to the chiefs of staff. And he used to say, kind of laughable, he used to say, I was only a colonel, and here I'm telling a four-star general what the president wants to do. I wonder what I would ever do if they said no, And he said, but they never did say no, to him. But anyway, you have this other level of the great military complex. Now, above that, you have either the future or the alien agenda. And that opens up a lot of, and above that, you have God, of course. Now, does the lower level know about the second one? Does the third level know about the second one? Does the second level believe that they are really in power when the great military complex is really in power? Once you begin to understand this, then you understand part of the reason why there is a cover-up. And by the way, when Dad was called in by Ike, he originated or founded the liaison between chiefs of staff, and like I said, would carry the orders. Actually, later on, it was called Colonel North's job, which more people might be familiar with. But when I called him in, he said, where are they from, Phil? And he says, I don't know. Actually, called him Corso. He says, where are they from, Corso? And he says, we don't know. And he says, what do they want? He says, well, we don't know. And he said, well, what do we know about it? And Dad said, well, they penetrated our airspace, and you and I are just old soldiers, so let's just say nothing. So hence the cover-up began, because everyone, CIA, everybody jumped on this bandwagon to cover up. I've seen Dad talk to some of these CIA people before his death and say, why are you still doing this? And they were retired. And one of them came forward once and said, I don't know why I'm still doing this. So maybe they have to die off first. In harsh terms, maybe they have to die off first before anything else is going to come forward. I don't know. It's an old agenda, and it's not needed anymore. My dad's had colonels come up at Air Force bases during the signings of the books and said, get this monkey off our back. We can't tell our wives, we can't tell our family anything what we do. He says, your book is right on.
Well, this is my last question before we get to sharing the documents that you'd like to expose on the show. Do you believe that ETs have a good, positive agenda, or have we missed the point by getting caught up in an us versus them mentality that's spread by mass perception and enforced by TV shows like The Event and films and even children's cartoon shows? Is there a positive, good, bad thing going on, or is it just us that's trying to get that out there, or is it true?
Well, Dad said this. Part of the cover-up is, how would you like to be in an Air Force general and know that these UFOs, or whatever you want to call them, come in and can disarm your missiles, can raise havoc with the Air Force, can take back crafts that have been crashed, and there's nothing you can do about it. But you're this big, bad Air Force, you know, it has the latest, greatest stealth and this and that, and there's nothing you can do about it. It would be very embarrassing if you admitted E.T. was doing these things. So you'd simply say he doesn't exist, you know? So that's the way I see it. I mean, you know, that's part of the cover-up, in other words. That's probably going to get me in a lot of trouble, but, you know, I'm old enough now that maybe I can take a little bit of trouble.
Well, you said that you wanted to reveal some documents that you'd like to share with the public for the first time. Can you set up the background of these documents and what exactly you're asking from the listeners?
Yeah, let me ask my son, Andrew. He was going to send them to you by a photograph by email. You may have gotten them. I know we tried to send them earlier and they wouldn't go with the fax. But what it is a man came to us, and his name's Marshall Payne. He's in a wheelchair, and he runs a society. And he's a friend of Edgar Mitchell's, and Edgar knows him. Not a real good friend, Edgar said. But he called me about 3 weeks ago, and he says, I have a letter that I want to send to you where a very important person has come forward, and he wants to remain anonymous. So we'll just call him Mr. X, and he's afraid for his life and his family if he would ever bring anything forward like this. Now, again, we don't know if these are true or not, but here's the way it reads. To Mr. Blank, that's going to remain anonymous, from Lieutenant Colonel J. Corso. I'm trying to focus in on this. It's really hard to read. By order of 00325. By Lieutenant General Trudeau, Lieutenant General Trudeau, Pentagon staff, confidential only, for your eyes only. By the, Joel, help me with some of this, or you can't. He's standing in the background. Okay, here we go. This is on the small light emitting stick that cut metal and can start fires. The general staff wants you to to enlighten them on the suspected use that the occupants used it for. It emits a green light and can hurt your eyes. It also stays at the same size for over 1,000 yards. Of course, we know that's a laser now, but Dad thought it was a flashlight. Silly colonel, huh? Can we reverse engineer this item as we did the other materials? Jack has asked you to also help with the cloth that was gotten from number 3. He said it would last for years, will not wear out. We think it is made of hemp stems. It is very white and does not stain and is water resistant. The super hex radio is extremely small, and the head clip, when worn, you can hear more and we think it is used to contact those ships. Number 6 said it is used to find space continuum, a hole in time. All items are at Fort Bliss, the yard. Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso, Army Adjutant. And that's the letter.
So in your opinion, what are they really summing up here? What do you take from all of that?
Well, my interest in the letter is, again, if it is real, we need some help out there from people to find out what Order 00325 is. Apparently that's a military code of some sort. The other thing that I find very interesting is that who is number 3 and number 6? Is that a place? Is it a scientist? Is it an ET? I don't know, So I find that very interesting. As far as the materials, these are the things Dad talked about, the cloth, which was part of the alien suit, that you couldn't bend. And he did say, though, when you put a current to it, it became opaque. And not only could you see through it, but energy would pass through it, RF energy. And when you took it away, there was no more RF energy, and it was very hard to penetrate, almost impossible. So we know of that cloth, from the Roswell crash. We lived in Fort Bliss, Dad and I, and I know there was some night vision there and so on and so on. So anyway, that's what the letter is. How true it is, I don't know.
Now, your father revealed that those were items that were reverse engineered in his book, and so the release of this document. What do you feel the intention is to help you find further information on these particular items?
No, I think it's just to confirm that, Dad said they left no paper trail because they were afraid of infiltration by the Russians. And Stalin, in fact, put out a mandate that during the Eisenhower administration, that was his number 1 mandate, is to steal Roswell technology. So they left no paper trail, but maybe this is a piece of the mistake or a paper trail that Dad made.
I'm going to change again. I'm going to switch gears here. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention about these documents before we move on to another subject?
No, that's about it.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for bringing that to my listeners and for bringing that to the show. And I really wish you the best of luck with finding information about that. I wanted to go in the last last 15 minutes or so of the show and ask you, why are they so concerned? Why do they seem so concerned? Now, this has been released publicly that the nuclear missiles can be disarmed by, quote, ETs, UFOs, can disarm them. What is their main concern, in your opinion, what they're really worried about? Are they worried about us just blowing ourselves up?
Well,
is there something about that technology that they don't want?
Dad was very good friends with President Reagan. And President Reagan used to call Dad quite a bit when we would been running this marine electronics store, and Dad would always stand at attention behind the desk when he would call, so I knew who it was. But Dad was President Reagan was, of course, we know, very aware of ET. He said to Khrushchev, I believe, that or Gorbachev, that we may have to fight this war together. Well, Dad did say that there was actual war going on. In other words, it's a secret war just like the Cold War, but there was a secret war where these creatures were actually raping us, abducting us, coming into military bases. He said they followed every single missile that has ever been shot. He says they interfered with a lot of our Mars probes. They interfere with everything. So there's actually a war going on, or has been a war. Now here, Dad went to Reagan and he says we need a planetary defense system. That's what the SDI was about. It was a planetary defense system that's still in use right now. And there's been a famous shot from a shuttle where you actually see a UFO coming in and a laser particle beam weapon comes up from the Earth and it turns 90 degrees and runs from it. So, this hot war with ET, you can see why the military would not want you to know what's going on, because there's really not a lot that they could do about it.
And so the fact that they're moving into disclosing this more publicly, do you feel that's because it's accelerating, or is it just getting harder to cover up with things like the Internet and that kind of stuff?
No, because we're winning the war. And Dad did say we have literally caught up with them in every technology except for biology. That's what Dad said.
And
so
when you say winning
that
the war
is beginning to be won, sure, now you can begin, bragging a little bit.
So when you say winning the war, how do you personally see this?
It's a war.
As something we have to. I'm sorry. Do you see this as something that we have to protect ourselves against, or do you see some good coming out of this?
No, I see that we have to protect ourselves against it. My dad's exact words are, quote, "They play very rough."
And have you had any personal experience with the ET phenomenon yourself? Did you interact with them on any level growing up, or on that sense?
Every time my father had an experience, I had an experience. Yes.
And so does your own family have the same experiences now because of what you do?
They do.
Yeah. It's interesting how I think that works. It's a very common theme among people who talk about this. The bio-nanotechnology, the bioengineered life forms that you've spoken very briefly on, how do we know the difference between what we've created and what are authentic ETs?
Well, that's Hillary. That is exactly the double-sided sword. You remember Star Trek 5, where they go back and get the whales, and Scotty is standing there, and he's giving them the matrix for the transparent aluminum, and he begins talking to the computer, and the computer doesn't talk back to him, and he says, "Oh, you have to type it." And he says, "Oh, very quaint." So the fellow begins giving the fellow the matrix, and he begins typing it in, and what's one of the other guys? The Russian guy is standing there, and he's saying, "You're breaking the prime directive." And Scotty looks at him and says, "Well, how do you know you didn't invent the damn stuff anyway?" So you see, if you back engineer something, how do you know that you didn't invent it anyway? You have to think about that one for a minute. I'm sure everyone does.
So what do you feel, Phil, in the last few minutes of the show as we wrap up here? We have about 5 minutes left. What are your personal agenda with this? What do you feel is your purpose in all of this? I mean, this hasn't just landed in your lap for no reason. There has to be a reason why you feel you and even your family have been involved.
Well, sure. It's because we know we're headed down a path of no return. There's a little question about that. And we have had the technology for a long time. Hope that we can seed this technology into the right places to where it can help us. There's technology out there that you and I cannot imagine. For instance, way back in the 60s, Dad had an atomic reactor the size of a football. They put it up in Alaska, didn't touch the thing for 5 years, and produced so much reverse osmosis water, like thousands of gallons and such, and wasn't touched. Where is that device? Why hasn't it been put out to the public? Size of a table. The whole operation was the size of a table, So why don't we have these things? These atomics, we have been told, keep them out of space. We have been told to stay out of space. The Russians, the Berlin Wall came down, Dad says, because the Russians put atomic nukes in space. And they were told to close by ET. Just a simple fact. Close down. You're finished. So, you see, maybe the fourth level has more influence than we think it does.
Do atomic bombs do something to the dimensional fabric that separates the veil between them? Yeah,
Dad knew Olbert real well. Part of Operation Paperclip, worked on the atomic bomb, lived in Palm Beach. They talked often. And Olbert said, we should have known, Phil, after the first explosion, that the energy is missing, and it's in the other dimensions. So there you go. It's that simple. When we put off an atomic bomb, we disturb the other dimensions, and here they come. They're going to set us straight. And remember, if they want us gone, they have all the time in the world. They don't have to hurl a satellite or hurl anything down here, an asteroid. All they have to do is change our genetics, and we are finished. If you look at the sperm cell count, especially in England, it's down 20-something%, So, the genetic bombs are a very scary thing. So,
is it part of population control, though? I mean, there is an agenda within our own people. to depopulate the planet on a level where, you know, the planet is sustainable again. So again, then we get into conspiracy theories and we get into New World Orders, you know, theories along those lines. And I'm curious how the average person is going to navigate through that stuff.
Well, you live and you die, and you're going to die anyway. So, you know, I don't know the answer there. The only I can say is that if the world is to survive by reduced population, our future selves would certainly know that, and they would certainly be sowing the seed now to take care of that. You know, I hope not, but I really don't know. It's just speculation.
It's food for thought, though. I mean, you have to admit, once you get into the ET subject, which many people get in very hesitantly because there's so much ridicule and it's weird and people might think you're crazy or whatever. Once they get into that and they navigate through it and they start realizing that there is a conspiracy on some levels and there's a lot of disinformation.
Well, Hillary, that might be, but on a closing note, let me just say this. If we were to grow up with the morals and the religion and the things that are missing, this earth could sustain all of us, and we could have a wonderful future. Are we going to be able to do that? Well, that's what I would like to help with. If any way, shape, or form, my father, which I think was destined, I don't think it was an accident that he came into all these positions in his life. He literally at one time knew every important person in the world, from the Russian KGB on through. It's just one of these things that I think if we could get some common sense and stop the greed and move forward, I think we all could make it on this planet. I really do. And we could possibly go to other places. Not other planets. Forget other planets. Man can't travel in space, Dad says. And NASA has known that for many years. But what we can do is go to other places, other dimensions. And that's where you go when you die anyway. So, why hurry it up? Let's take care of this dimension here and let's live within this dimension.
So I want to ask you this in closing. Do you think that developing one's intuition and psychic abilities and learning techniques such as remote viewing and those kinds of things help with the process of being able to time travel and work in different dimensions and even communicate with other, life forms on different levels?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Dad was a great time traveler. He was a great remote viewer. And if you do have these powers, though, you have to be careful. You have to learn how to harness them, and you still have to live within this system here. So again, a two-sided sword. You have to live with these powers. You have to know how to use these powers. But yes, it's an enlightenment. But as you talk to people nowadays, it's really amazing. Everyone understands it. And it's not a mystery anymore. Just like everyone understands money now and how money is made and how you can make money and such. Well, 20 years, 50 years ago, people did not understand money. So now people are beginning to understand this new awakening or this new awareness. That's what I believe.
So, Corso Jr. joined me for the last hour. I want to say thank you very much for being here and for sharing the last hour with not only myself but with my listeners and the information that you have shared, and for your courage in doing so. And I just want to let everybody know out there that your website is highspeedcomposites.com. And do you have any events coming up, Phil, where people can see you speak?
Well, yeah, we're going to have some big things possibly coming in the future. Right now, we just can't talk about them because they haven't happened yet. They're still being born. But I would like to get some of my dad's notes out, and we would like to, help the world, if it's possible, with some of my dad's notes. It's not that my dad is the savior of the world. It's that people are the savior of the world, and we already have these technologies, and let's begin using them. Let's begin applying them. Let's stop the greed, and let's just move forward with God.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. You've listened to the Hillary Raimo Show. You can find all of this information, Phil's website, on my radio homepage and also my website, HillaryRaimo.com. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Join me next week, same time, same place. Until then, live well. Namaste.